In the year, something horrific was discovered in the snowy state of in the northern regions of the United States. This entity was discovered by a vandal. In the early hours of the morning, he travelled to a water tower on the edge of his small and run-down town to graffiti, but from the top of the water tower, he noticed something in the neighbouring lake. For oddly vague reasons, the lake had been closed off for a while now, but the height of the tower gave him visibility over the strangely tall privacy fence that had been erected to keep intruders out, and what he saw from his vantage point confused him. There was very clearly something bobbing in the water. He tried to disregard it. Even though it looked like someone in the water, it wasn't his problem. But as he tried to turn away, he realised that he couldn't. As he hung over the railing of the water tower, he realised there was something familiar about who or what he could see in the water. The more he looked, the more this feeling of familiarity grew, and he began to recognise people he knew, people from his past. A girl from his home economics class, an old friend, and a neighbour. Memories came flooding back in an almost violent manner, causing him to fall backwards and gain a splitting headache. As he tried to regain his composure, he realised he was now unable to focus on himself and felt entirely compelled to go and save the people in the water. He quickly ditched the tower and left behind all evidence of his crime and rode his bike down a snowy path through a forest to the lake. It was utterly silent in the forest, besides the sound of the wind screaming through the trees.
No, not the wind. Can you hear us?
The closer he got to the water, the more drowning hazard signs started popping up. In fact, the area was littered with them, but he paid them no mind. He was determined to save his friends. He did notice, however, that the closer he got to the water's edge, the colder the air seemed to get, despite the fact that the sun was rising.
It is always cold. That's why they need you.
When he reached the lake, he was greeted by thick barbed wire, but instead of stopping to consider why there was such a lethal obstacle obstructing people from getting to what is realistically just a simple lake, he instead found an awfully convenient hole in the wall, concealed by a bush. As he emerged on the other side of the wall, now only feet from the water, what he saw was perplexing.
Can you see them? Can you see us? Can you see them? Can you see them? They can see you. We can see you. Will you help us? Do you remember us? How could you forget? After everything. Don't you remember us?
He was lost for words. In the water, the bodies in the water were everyone he knew. Every one of them. All his friends, all his family, even people that he couldn't fully recall. All together, drowning, yet beckoning him into the freezing water. Their bodies were corpses, their mouths weren't moving, yet they were calling to him. He couldn't let his friends, his family drown, and so he began to wade into the water, almost overpowered by their ghostly beckoning. The water was freezing. With each step he could feel the ground getting further away. It was up to his thighs. He was shivering. His heart began to drop. Something was wrong.
Help us, please. What about all those years? Was it all for nothing? You promised. We need you. Remember us?
Despite the temperature, he continued marching into the freezing lake, getting slower with each step, insistent that he could help, that it didn't have to be this way. With the water now up to his chest, the creeping dread and his deep-seated fear of water was becoming insufferable. As a kid, he almost drowned in his uncle's pool, and ever since, his phobia of water had been extreme. And yet, he had become so overpowered by the bodies in the water that this phobia, this irrational fear, didn't even cross his mind.
Don't turn back. Don't leave us here. Please. You promised.
Deeper and deeper he went, the water up to his neck before losing his footing. The bottom had disappeared, and he was choking on icy water, flailing in the lake.
It's alright. We've waited so long. We could have been so much, done so much. All gone. Wasted.
In their arms now, I can see their faces. I recognize all of them. I know all of them. We're finally together. They've been waiting for me for so long. How could I have forgotten? Forgotten? Why would they do that to us? How could they? They can't do that. They can't leave us here. You can't leave me here. Don't forget me.
Warning. The following SCP file contains images and text that have been identified as carriers for anomalous cognitohazard influences. Simply viewing the following text and images can lead to death. You do not recognize the bodies in the water. To continue on with this entry, you must pass the following cognitive resistance verification with a cognitive resistance value of no less than 14.5. Should you fail the verification, please remain calm and do not move. A member of your site's medical staff will be with you shortly. Please enter the following phrase into the comments section below this video on your terminal. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Verification successful.
Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's take a look at the entity that caused that lake to be quarantined. SCP-2316 is an anomalous phenomenon found in Lake within county in the state of SCP-2316 is designated Keter Containment Class, indicating how difficult it is to contain both consistently and reliably, requiring extensive, expensive, and complex containment procedures due to the distinct lack of understanding the Foundation has about it. It also received the Kennock Disruption class, with a medium potential to disrupt the general population, and with disruption confined to its local region or city. And it received the Danger Risk class, indicating its incredibly high risk potential and propensity to cause serious harm and death, effects that are very difficult to mitigate. SCP-2316 manifests as a group of human corpses floating in a small group on the surface of the water, the number of which is currently undetermined due to the immense risk the entity poses, but is speculated to be somewhere between 45 and over 200 bodies. The bodies themselves have been identified as I do not recognize the bodies in the water.
Verification successful.
DNA testing on these bodies has been inconclusive. Although SCP-2316 does appear to be a number of individual entities, many within the Foundation actually theorize that it is instead a collective consciousness, multiple separated beings that in fact are all the same entity. The individual entities do not act on their own, rather seem to act collectively as a single unit. These individual entities are unrecognizable, and you do not recognize the bodies in the water. I do not recognize the bodies in the water.
Verification successful.
The lethal cognitohazard of SCP-2316 causes all who view the entity, are aware of certain parts of its nature, or who are enrolled in the to believe the individual instances of 2316 are human beings that they recognize, typically individuals from their childhood. Attempted contact with SCP-2316 instances by either entering the lake or, worse, touching an instance, causes other instances to appear in the water. These new entities only strengthen the cognitohazard, compelling individuals into the lake. Any who enter the lake are to be considered lost, and to this date, none have been recovered. In this following interview conducted by Dr. Harrison, a lead SCP-2316 researcher, a redacted individual who attempted to enter the lake may have unearthed a connection between SCP-2316 and SCP-1833. During the interview, the redacted individual insisted that he was neither compelled nor pulled into the lake, that there was nothing wrong with the people in the lake, he simply saw them in the water, saw that they were his friends, and wanted to hear what they were saying, so tried to get closer. In the water, he said that he saw his friends, some faces he recognised, some he didn't, but they became more familiar as he saw them. He'd known them his entire life, but there was something wrong with them. Their faces were like the faces that you see in a dream when your memory is kind of hazy. There was something wrong with them, and they were speaking. At this point, it became clear that the subject was succumbing to the Cognitohazard. However, he continued to insist that they were talking. They weren't moving their mouths, but he could hear them, asking for help, telling him who they were, telling him that Dr. Harrison knew who they were. The security agents were brought in, and as the individual was being dragged out of the interview room, he began to scream, "All it takes is one person to see them and tell people, and they'll know what you've been trying to hide. Birchwood High School, class of 76. The recording then abruptly ended. The Birchwood High School class of 76 yearbook is SCP-1833. It's a yearbook that creates an anomalous effect in its reader, causing them to, at first, perceive it as their own yearbook, with messages from friends and people they went to high school with. However, the further into the yearbook the reader gets, the more negative the tone of the messages and pictures becomes, often depicting the reader in humiliating and embarrassing situations. And by the end, the content becomes dark, twisted, and rather violent, showing familiar people with mutilated faces, staring directly at the reader. It appears that these mutilated facial effects, along with the strange recognition properties of SCP-1833, are also present in SCP-2316. Why this is the case and the reason for the connection between the two is currently unknown. Dr. Harrison has refused to comment further. Containment and investigation of SCP-2316 is to be done entirely remotely, using dummy probes to gather video and audio recordings of the entity. Under no circumstances must any Foundation personnel approach SCP-2316, nor should any personnel with a Cognitohazard rating value under 14.5 review footage and audio of SCP-2316. The lake it is currently contained in has been quarantined and fenced off, and is routinely patrolled by guards who are oblivious to the entity's existence and have no prior knowledge of its characteristics. I do not recognize the bodies in the water.
Verification successful.
Any individual who attempts to breach the quarantine wall should be immediately apprehended and moved to Site-33 for a full cognitive influence screening. Any individual who comes within 50 meters of the lake are to be considered lost, and all efforts to retrieve them should be denied. And that brings today's briefing on SCP-2316 to a close.
They don't have enough time. We need to get away. Go after the lake. Go into the water. Look into their eyes. It's your friends. Your classmates. We took a trip after the lake in 475. Together. When we were young. Don't you remember? Look into their eyes. I know you can hear them talking to you, just like they talk to me. Don't let them tell you it's a Cognitohazard. This was their fault. They caused this. We were all innocent kids. Don't you remember? And then you just got away. You and I. The rest of them are at the bottom of the lake, waiting for us to go back to them and be whole together again. They want us to know. They want us to remember. Wake up, goddammit! Remember the fall of 75, the year you were supposed to graduate. Don't let them make you forget. They're calling to you. Can't you hear them? 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 Look into their eyes. I know you can. They're waiting for you. Go back to the lake.
And that is SCP-2316, the bodies in the water. Even though I do think it's technically meant to be called Field Trip, despite it not formally being named anywhere, I feel like The Bodies in the Water is such a creepy name that really fits the ultra creepy vibe of this SCP so much better, so you know what, I'm gonna call it that. I honestly though really like creepy things like this that kind of mix that fear of the unknown with something so familiar. The fear of the unknown in particular is one of the greatest tools in horror, if you ask me, and I really wish it was used more nowadays. I really want to cover more SCPs that use fear of the unknown, so if you have any ideas for what I should cover next, then let me know down below in the comments. But yeah, with that said, that's going to bring the third SCP video to a close. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. You guys seem to really be enjoying the SCP videos, which honestly makes me so happy. I'm really thankful for that. So I want to give a massive thank you to all of my amazing patrons for all the support over there, as per usual. And thank you all once again so much for watching, especially for watching an SCP video. I really, really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.